equipment that we'll be using in baking. Sieve, absolutely important. We need the sieve so that we can add additional air to our baked good, but also to ensure that any debris that could exist, so things like flour, sometimes you might have a little bit of the bag that you tear the flour with, sometimes that drops into the flour, any possible debris that you don't want to have, as well as lumps. We want to make sure that when we are using our dry ingredients, that it's free of lumps, and your sieve will allow you to do that. So this is a sieve, and the action is to sift, okay? So you will sift your flour using the sieve, okay? We have our spatula, okay? This is a silicone spatula, so we also use these in cooking. They are resistant to heat, 500 degrees Fahrenheit they can go to without melting, but they are extremely important when it comes to baking. When we come to baking, we want to be able to scrape our bowl, we want to get everything out the bowl, and again, you keep hearing me talking about money, 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 cost, 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 throwing it in the bin. We want to get everything out that bowl, because it's amazing what we leave back in the bowl can actually give me an additional cupcake that can give me an additional $3 when we sell it at the canteen, right? So you want to have your spatula. I've introduced you to the palette knife before. The palette knife, especially for the chocolate cake we're using today, I'm going to be using this to crack my eggs, mostly. That's what I'm going to use it for, as well as to scrape the top of my measuring spoon, as you saw me do earlier. I will be using the palette knife for that preparation. If it was for any other types of baked goods, you can use it to help to lift them off the baking pan, etc. The whisk. I would use the whisk if it be that I want to whisk eggs, but I also use it to help incorporate my dry ingredients. So when we combine our cocoa with our flour, which we have sifted, I still want to make sure that all my dry ingredients are fully and evenly incorporated. And to ensure that I get even more air into my cake, because when we're making a cake, which we're using the creaming method, we want a really light cake. So we want as much air as possible. So when I'm incorporating my dry ingredients, I will be using the whisk. I've introduced you to the measuring spoons, extremely important. In our measuring, we use them for both our liquid ingredients and our dry ingredients. We have our baking pans. So we have two types of baking pans. Okay, these are our cake pans, and we already have them lined, as you can see, with parchment paper. Parchment paper is a baker's best friend. We use it for everything, whether it's to line our baking pans, whether it's to line our baking sheets. For whatever we want to bake, we use the parchment paper. Today, I am going to be creaming our butter and sugar using the hand mixer. Of course, you can use your spoon, but we will be using the hand mixer today. We must have our cooling rack, so when our goods are baked, today our chocolate cake, we want to remove the chocolate cake from the cake pan because these are made with metal. We know that metal conducts heat, and if we leave the cooked cake in the pan for too long, the cooking process continues and you can dry out your cake. So you want that, yes, you let it cool just so you can handle it enough to remove it from the cake pan, and we put it onto a cooling rack. The cooling rack is designed specifically for cooling. It's raised with the legs and it has holes so that there's circulation of cool air all around your baked goods. So those are the baking equipment that we will be using today. We have measured our sugar and we've measured our butter. 1 pound of sugar and 1 pound of butter. So now we are going to cream our butter and sugar. So the technique that we are using today to make our chocolate cake is the creaming method. Creaming method is always a technique that requires the butter and the sugar to be creamed together. So let's start. I'm using the hand mixer. Safely place your mixer with the beaters into your butter and sugar and turn it on. Okay, at this stage, we are not fully ready yet. We still need to beat some more, but you can see I have some butter just above that needs to be incorporated into the mixture. So this is where we take our spatula and we scrape the sides of our bowl. Do you see how clean that is? So make sure that that spatula really presses on the side of the bowl so that you pick up everything. As I told you, it's a science, right? So we cannot leave out any of that butter, not 1 ounce. Not if we want to get perfection on our cake. We have beaten our margarine and our sugar, and you can see that our mixture has doubled in quantity. We now have a light pale color, and it is also fluffy in texture. So it's not only doubled in volume, but you see it's nice and light and pale in color. So yes, you can still see some of the sugar granules in there. That's okay. Once you've you've doubled the volume and it's light in color, your cake is going to come out just fine. All right. Now we are going to add our eggs one at a time. Before I do that, I just want to give my bowl one more scrape. And I'm going to add my eggs. Now, add in the eggs. We are now having to add an ingredient that has water base to its makeup. So the albumin in the egg, the white part of the egg, is mostly water. We have to incorporate this into a mixture that has a high ratio of fat. Water, fat generally don't mix. So how do we ensure that our eggs mix in with our creamed mixture to ensure that they are fully working together? What we call an homogeneous mixture. Homogeneous, big word, don't worry about it. It just means that we're going to get this ingredient that's high in water, this ingredient that's high in fat, party, have a good time, come together to make our cake. So how do we do that? You have to add your eggs gradually. Depending on the quantity that you're doing, small quantities like this, 8 eggs is what we're using for this recipe. We can add the eggs one at a time. If we're dealing with larger quantities, we can add something like 2, 3, even 4 eggs depending on the volume of what you're doing. Okay? Small volume like this, we would go one at a time. You can't go wrong. So, always, we want to ensure that our eggs are good. Do not crack all of your eggs into one bowl or crack your eggs straight into your butter mixture, your cream mixture, before placing it into another bowl to ensure it's a good egg. From the time you put a bad egg into your batch, everything has to throw away. I'm using my palette knife, clean cut. Lovely fresh egg. In he goes. Start on a low speed. Increase one speed up. One egg down. So we're not seeing any traces of egg in there. Two eggs down. So what's the role of eggs? What is the role of eggs? Again, in cake making, we want to incorporate as much air as possible. Air is an element that we use to help aerate our cakes. So the more we beat, we're incorporating air. So how did our butter and sugar become so light and fluffy? It's the air. It's the air that we beat into the mixture. Eggs, due to the high water content in our egg mixture, once that is beaten, that then takes in air, that aerates, and that also adds air into our eggs, into our mixture. So the role of the egg is to add moisture, which comes from the fat of the yolk, but the egg white is to assist in aeration. Question, is there a science to how long I have to beat an egg? You can say so. I apply my own science. It's worked for me all this time. I count 20 seconds for each egg I add in. That way you're sure that your egg is completely incorporated. Tip to remember when it comes to your ingredients for your cake, especially your eggs, always at room temperature. By having your eggs at room temperature, it would incorporate into the fat much easier. If your eggs are cold, what happens is you add the cold egg to the fat and the fats will start to solidify, and then you will start to see what we call splitting. It looks like if the water is separating from the mixture, and that's because your eggs are cold and it's starting to solidify your fats. So you always want to work with your eggs at room temperature. Now, if it so happens that all of your eggs are not fully at room temperature, sometimes your cake can still come together because in beating, using an electric beater, we get friction. Friction creates heat, and that will help warm up your eggs. But it is always preferred room temperature eggs. So we are at our final egg. You see our mixture, light, pale, wonderfully homogeneous. All of our ingredients are working together and happy together. We're going to give it one more scrape before I add the last egg. And you see, we, as I told you, it still had some sugar granules when we had creamed the butter and sugar. But that stage, once it's pale and fluffy, is perfectly fine because your eggs also assist in dissolving the sugar. Our eggs have been incorporated beautifully into our cream, butter and sugar. So in the process of cake making and using the creaming method, it is always cream, your butter, for us it was margarine, sugars, and then you beat in your eggs. At this stage, we are going to add our dry ingredients. However, in this recipe, we also are going to add a liquid ingredient. So all cakes using the cream method do not necessarily add a liquid ingredient, but we're adding to ours. So I'm going to show you how we do that. First, I need to add my essence. We're going to be using vanilla essence, and we're going to add it to our already measured ½ cup of milk. I have my teaspoon. It's 2 teaspoons of vanilla essence. How do we measure to get into our milk? Again, we want to make sure that we have a vessel that can catch any excess liquid. Never measure over the milk. It must be over some other clean vessel that you can always pour it back in, okay? So it's steady. This is one you have to have a steady hand. You can't put it on top of surface like that. It just can't work. With your your spoon measurements, you have to hold with a steady hand. So it's just a new bottle of essence, students. So that happens when you have a new bottle of essence. Just clean that up. My excess is gone in here. And I have a lovely teaspoon of essence, and you can see that it takes straight to the top. So that's 1. And that's 2. 2 teaspoons. Of course, my mise en place, you see I have my cloth. My station is lovely and clean. All right, it's not like on the cartoons where they got the flour all over the place. Nice and clean. In our dry ingredients, we have 4 ounces of cocoa powder, 12 ounces of all-purpose flour, 3 teaspoons, level teaspoons of baking powder, ½ a teaspoon of baking soda, and ½ a teaspoon of salt. Salt, you say? Salt? Yes, salt. Salt is one of those ingredients that bring out the flavors of all of your ingredients. So even in baking, we use salt, okay? It has other active purposes, but when you do more baking, we can speak about salt another time. So you can see I used my whisk lovely just to incorporate all my dry ingredients until everything is evenly distributed. And of course, all of our dry ingredients were sifted using the sieve to add air as well as to remove lumps. Cocoa can be very lumpy. I'm going to transfer my cream mixture into a larger bowl. This is, see, it's already full. So by the time I add flour, etc., I don't have enough space. So let's add that to a larger bowl. So, in it goes. So I am going to add in my flour using folding. You can fold with your large spatula, but I'm going to show you really how to use a large cooking spoon. Also, it's a serving spoon as well. We do use them to serve, but they can be multifunctional. And because of this amount of batter, would prefer a larger spoon. So, we're going to add our dry ingredients in 3 parts, as equal as possible. So I just divide it up into 3. Because between each stage, we're going to add our milk. So we start with the dry ingredients. We're going to fold that in first, add half our milk, then fold in the second third, the rest of our milk, and the last of our flour. Okay? You can indeed use the mixer for this, but it will need to be on low speed. We want a light cake. And the more you work flour, the tougher it becomes. Again, as I told you, baking is a science. Flour contains proteins that when liquid and movement is applied, they pull together and form what we call the protein gluten. And as gluten moves about, it becomes stronger and tougher, thus a tough egg. So that's why folding in your flour is extremely important. So folding, I'm picking up and I'm turning over. I move the bowl with me because I want to get all that flour in as quickly as possible in as few folds as possible. And folding also incorporates air. So every time I fold over, it's trapping air. And I move the spoon with me, just like that. Now I'm going to add the milk, half the milk. So a half cup means I need to add a quarter cup, right? So just a little bit more. Am I at a quarter cup? I am at a quarter cup. Now we're going to add our second third. So we're now having 2/3 of our dry mixture. Be patient, okay? Don't start to get crazy. Yes, you might be counting down time. That's why prioritizing your work is important. Because when you are folding, you want to you want to make sure your technique is applied accurately. So at this stage, I'm going to use my spatula, bring all of those ingredients in. See all that dry ingredients over there? So we need to make sure it's in our mixture. Otherwise, our recipe is going to be losing out on what we've measured, right? The base of the spoon as well, because what happens is sometimes the flour can sit to the base of the spoon. Fold. So I know you students will be very tempted to want to use the machine. It seems it will be quicker. But I promise you that by taking your time and folding, you will indeed end up with a much better product. Now, of course, if we're doing a bulk cake requiring something like 10 pounds of flour, 30 eggs, we wouldn't do this. We would use the industrial mixer with the paddle, and it would have the speeds, it has stir, and it would very slowly fold in our dry ingredients. But this is worth the journey. Lovely. So look at that. A wonderful homogeneous mixture. Everything incorporated. No excess liquid. No lumps of flour. All beautifully incorporated and ready to pan. Mise en place. Always important. Especially in bacon. Always important. When you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. So we have our pans already lined, we had our ingredients already measured. It takes a while, but when it comes to executing, everything is in place to allow us to have the best product possible. We haven't forgotten any of our ingredients because that happens because we had everything in place. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. How much mixture do you put in a pan? We have our leveling agents, which is our baking powder and baking soda. That is going to allow for a chemical reaction, and that is going to then allow, when the heat applies, it's going to then incorporate more air, allow for rising. We have the air that we incorporated through folding and whisking and sifting, and then we have the eggs that we beat in. So therefore, we're going to get a lovely rise to our cake when we put it to bake. That means you cannot overfill your pan. General rule, half of your pan. Evenly spread. I know that on the internet, you see them doing this. It does have its place for certain baked items. When it comes to your cake, all of those lovely air bubbles that we work so hard to put in here is what is going to give rise to our cake. So you do not have to knock those bubbles out of your cake, and it's already evenly distributed in your cake. So for your cream method, you can just make sure it's nice and smooth and you put it in to bake. Consistency. If you are doing a large amount of cakes, let's say you're doing cupcakes, we want to make sure that each and every cupcake is the same size. Just like how we used the scoop when we made our bakes to ensure that we have the right quantity of batter, you would do the same thing with your cake batter. If you're using pans, what we do is we actually put these on our scales, and we would weigh out how much batter we would put in each pan. So of course the amount that you put in each pan depends on the pan that you're using. So a small pan like this you would use, if you have, like, let's say we had 3 of these and I want to maintain consistency, we would weigh the batter in each pan. So you put it on your digital scale, tear the baking pan, add your batter. That's the most you can do just to make sure it's evenly distributed. And that's our cake, ready to bake. Now we are going to bake our cakes. You must always make sure you preheat your oven. You don't want to be putting your cakes into an oven that has not reached the desired temperature, because you will have uneven baking. So it must be preheated. So while we were mixing our ingredients to formulate our cake, our oven was on. This oven is a convection oven. It means the heat is circulated using a fan. So you always would bring down the temperature of your oven in comparison to a regular range. The temperature we normally bake our cakes at, our cream cakes, is 180 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. However, in this convection oven, I have decreased the temperature to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. So we want to make sure safety first, not too hot, open. All right, so you will get an injection of heat, so stay away from the oven, let it open. Safety first. The shelf is preferred in the middle of the oven. In the middle, you can't go wrong. Convection ovens, we do have an even circulation of heat due to the fan, but with our cakes, we want that heat is perfect for baking, and you cannot go wrong in the middle. So whether it's a convection oven or your regular range, always go for your shelf in the middle of the oven. As you can tell, we're dealing with two different pans. This pan is more shallow than that one. This one is deeper than that one. So that can suggest that one cake will bake faster than the other. More than likely this one, because we're dealing with less volume, will bake quicker than this one. Not only is this less volume, but it has more surface area. So this can bake quicker than this one. So we will put this in. We'll set our timer for 45 minutes. We will then come and we will check the doneness of our cakes. And our chocolate cake is finished. So how do we know our chocolate cake is finished, or any cake is finished? We have to test the cake. The preferred choice is the use of a skewer, whether it be a bamboo skewer like this one or a metal skewer. You do want something long because you have to test the center of your cake. Do not use your lovely honed or sharpened chef knife or paring knife. You will dull the edge of your knife. They are not the best tool to use when testing doneness. Your skewer, bamboo or metal. So we test it straight down the center of your cake, pull it out, nice and clean, cake is complete. Now we have to get our cake out of the pan. We do not want the cake to sit in the pan too long. Heat is conducting through the pan. That means that our cake will continue cooking, so we don't want to dry out our cake. So the sooner you can get it out of the pan, the better. So the pan is hot. Can't use our bare hands. So we're going to place a cooling rack on the top. We're going to use a towel that can cover the pan and cover the rack, and so that you can hold the pan safely. Turn it over. Remove the pan. Take your second rack back on the top. Turn it over. And there's your cake. And you leave that to cool before you're ready to slice.